Welcome everyone to this week's lesson on machinery and equipment. Just as always, we are available to check out our website. It's in our description below. We have our link to donate to the Stratford Ecological Center. This week, like I said, we're going to be talking about machinery and equipment. Machinery and equipment has kind of like a huge history, from tools that we continue to use by hand to some of the more advanced equipment that we see in cropping practices and livestock practices as well. So we're mainly going to be focusing on equipment that we use for kind of like a crop system, but some of the equipment is also pretty useful in a livestock operation as well, just as we are a diversified operation. So it's important to kind of consider the implications that machinery and equipment has in agriculture. It has allowed us to kind of advance our ability to produce more food, and it allows us to really interact with the environment and the earth in a new and different way. Because, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the tools that we still use today, some were just used by hand, and that kind of allowed us to have a more intimate experience, whereas some of the bigger machines kind of create, we kind of removes us from that experience a little bit more. So it's kind of, I want you to keep that in mind as we continue on throughout this lesson. I'm going to go ahead and show the schedule for the rest of the summer. So next week we are actually going to have 2 live streams. So on Tuesday, this is going to be a little bit different. Next week is Pollinator Week, which was established a little over 10 years ago. And one of our volunteers is going to be conducting a presentation on the value of native pollinators here in Ohio. And so if you guys are able to tune in next Tuesday at 4 o'clock, that'll be a really interesting presentation. And then on Thursday, we're going to continue our beginner farmer growing collaborative series and talk again about pollinators and kind of the products that you can sell from bees and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and show the schedule, and then we're going to jump right into this week's video on machinery and equipment.
Welcome everybody. I'm Jeff Dickinson with Stratford Ecological Center, and here today we're in the machine shed, what we call the machine shed, and we're going to go over through a few places farm equipment and the kinds of tools and things that keeping in mind every farm has very specific needs. And again, we talk about starting with goals and what your needs are and sort of working within your ability to provide those needs. Every farm is going to have a variety of things, and including a garden, and for a variety of reasons. And so we started here in what we call the small equipment area here. We're underneath a mezzanine within our solar-driven machine shed. And so actually right here, this hand here, and this hand here, I got 2 of my favorite tools for the scale for the gardener. This is a Honda it's a small sort of drag through the soil type rototiller. It's actually become one of my favorite tools to use for whenever you get behind on weeding. You can actually get into weeds like 4 or 5 inches tall, and it'll just rip it up and tear it down. Now, a tool like this does require a loamy, sort of frothy type soil, and but it's very effective. You can actually get up close to it and you sort of drag it back through, or you can actually walk it forward too. So I love this tool. It's easy to get around too. This is more a conventional type rototiller. This is actually one of the best rototillers I've ever owned. It's a Kubota. They don't even make it anymore. It's your conventional sort of garden rototiller, and it has both forward and rear tine action. So it You can actually convert it to other tools. This thing is designed so you can actually swing this bar around for like a sickle bar you could put on here, and so it's very versatile. It's very akin to what most gardeners have known as BCS. Of course, Troy-Bilt's another popular rototiller. And every garden is going to need small, like lawn mowers. This is actually a broken weed eater, walk-behind weed eater for fence lines. It's very effective for doing deep cutting of weeds along a fence line. We have a lot of electric fence here. And then again, if you own any property, you're always going to want to have a chainsaw or two around. We got some hedge trimmers over there. Hanging on the wall is a blower, which is very handy for sort of moving leaves and grass, and we use it for cleaning up areas, around the landscape too. So as we come up behind me here, we start to move up in scale here, and these are 2 DR mowers. They're basically walk-behind bush hogs, and they're very handy. They'll take a grass that's as tall as I am and knock it down like there's nothing going on. And we use it. We have 4.5 miles of trails here at Stratford, and it's very handy to keep the trails open. It's narrow enough we can get down narrow trails and get up and down rougher terrain. And these are very actively used tools. We have a lot of banks here around our pond too, and it's very effective in sort of getting into some steep and harder areas because it actually has wheel traction that you can control and move through the terrain. And then, of course, on the back wall there, hand tools. We could spend a whole hour just talking about hand tools, and there's so many different types. And again, it comes down to your specific needs. What do you want to accomplish? And then one of our volunteers here, he's got this Arctic cat here. It doesn't technically belong to us, but we use it, and it's a great tool to just get around and take other small tools areas. So let's start moving towards some larger equipment here, and we'll see about how things get scaled up here as we move forward. All right, so we're scaling up here a little bit. We're still at the small farm scale, and we were talking about rototillers. This was actually a tractor that was donated, beauty being a nonprofit. Something to consider if you're starting a farm is maybe start as a nonprofit. Anyways, this Kubota tractor is just a heavy workhorse for us. It's got the front end bucket. It can pull things. It's got a PTO on the back, and right now we have a rototiller on the back, which is a very effective tool. You can go into sort of medium height grass and rototill and break sod shallow. You can't go, it's not designed to go deep. And in fact, a lot of large scale equipment is sort of designed around the idea of rototiller. That's how a lot of farmers cover a lot of acreage very quick, in one pass even. So it's a very effective and tool for us. We can throw wagons on this, we can throw planting equipment, we can throw just a variety of plows on this implement right here. So let's go inside a little bit more here. This is a tool that I actually use on that piece of equipment right there. It's called a seed broadcaster, and it's very effective because it can, when it's on the back, I can raise and lower it. It's PTO driven. The PTO makes the seed spreader go back and forth and sort of shakes it and evenly disperses it over about a 16-foot area as you're moving forward, and just by ground speed you can control how much seed you put down at a time. So it's very effective, and I actually use it on larger tractors too. Broadcasters are nice to use when you can't really do any plowing. Say you want to renovate a pasture. A lot of times in the spring what I'll do is use a spike tooth harrow, which I'll show you later here, just to slightly scratch the surface, ideally with a little bit of moisture in it. And then I can come back over with this broadcaster and get the seed on the ground, spread out in times that are not ideal for planting, And then if I need to, I can actually come back with a spike tooth and sort of scratch it again to get it into the soil. A lot of seeds like Fesculaceum, which we talked about during the livestock session in cropping, actually doesn't need to be fully incorporated. It just has to have a nice seed-soil relationship. So we're going to move up much larger scale here now. This is another tool. It's not very commonly seen anymore. It's a drill. Most drills are like 4 or 5 times bigger than this. What's unique about this drill is it actually has a grass seed hopper. That you can put a mix of grass seed and legume seed in it. It actually drops the seed in front of the drill, and then the drill discs themselves actually work the seed into the ground a little bit as it's actually planting seed from this big, large hopper behind it. Your grains, oats, rye, spelt, very commonly grown, and it actually plants it in the ground. It actually cuts a slit in the ground and gets it into the soil. The seed size and the ability of this drill right here actually is very compatible with a variety of seeds. I can control the amount, and so I actually started this year going with a mix of my grain and the grass seed and the legume all mixed together and putting it all through the drill. And it takes actually less seed to plant that way, and you get a little better germination doing it that way. So this is a very versatile tool, and it keeps me in business for the 8-year crop rotation that we constantly are talking about here. So, okay, we're talking about, this is a large piece of equipment. It's not really suited for the kuboted to be pulled by. So this is our largest tractor here. We've got 236 acres here. I farm about 65 acres of that. Again, it's an 8-year crop rotation. So this tool is primarily used to pull larger pieces of equipment and for the large, heavy load type tillage systems that we'll talk about when we get outside. Very effective tool. It actually has a cab. It's not air conditioned, so in the summer it can get hot up there, so sometimes we can actually just take the windows down or take them off to keep us a little bit cooler in the cab. We're actually getting ready to make some hay today. We're going to be putting about 500 bales up, and we'll show you all the pieces of equipment that are involved in that. But as we come around the tractor here, right in front of me, and I'll sort of back up and talk about this other equipment too, is our hay baler. This baler is actually pretty reliable. What you do is you actually cut the hay. You got to let it sit for 2 or 3 days, depending on your weather. We've had excellent weather here recently. I have a volunteer right now over at that farm raking that hay into windrows, sort of making uniform windrows all around the field. And then we come back through with this baler. These little tines here actually pick up the hay and run it through the baler. This auger shoves it into the chamber. And this underneath here is a large flywheel that's like a large plunger that's always sort of pushing the hay towards the back. And actually has a knotter in the back there, which we won't take a look at, but it actually, after the bale gets so long, it automatically sends a needle through the bale, two twine sections that wrap around the bale, and it ties a knot, and then it pushes it back to the back until it eventually hits the ground. And we're sort of old school here. We actually pick bales up from the ground onto the wagon. We do have a chute that we can use to get the bales up on the wagon, and that's really handy when you're short-handed with a crew. Basically, someone in the tractor and one person on the wagon can literally pick up hay. And it takes longer, you're going slower, you can't go as fast when you got people on a wagon, but it's a very versatile tool that way. So while we're here, before we go outside, I'll talk about 2 more pieces here. This contraption, probably not many people have seen. It's a one-row corn picker. And we farm in our 8-year rotation anywhere from 5 to 15 acres of corn a year. This year we're doing about 7.5 acres. And so on that scale, a one-row corn picker is actually quite sufficient. It's not the kind of thing you would use on 20 acres or 50 acres, even though farmers have. So on most farms we see these days are not, that small. So anyways, very effective tool. It is very sensitive to the conditions. A lot of times we're harvesting corn in the winter months because of the organic system we have and the rotation. I normally don't plant corn until middle of May and later. I'm looking for that warm soil to get the seed up quick and create competition for the weeds right away. And then one more piece here. I actually used this last night. This is our corn planter. It's actually a very versatile tool itself. These hoppers, I flip them forward, and they use a disc system to sort of calibrate and measure the seed. You have to use different discs for different types of seed. Yesterday I actually did my last planting of corn for the season, and then I swapped the disc out, and I planted green beans. Stratford is very actively this year in these COVID times in producing food for those in need. So I did like a 300-foot swath, 4 rows wide. This is a 4-row corn planter. And I dropped green beans into the soil. It has little discs right behind the planter here, behind the hopper there, that actually shoves soil forward into the planting row and actually helps to cover the seed and warm it up and hold the moisture that we eventually will get. So very versatile tool again. You can do vegetable seed in there, of course corn, soybeans. It's just a very helpful tool. All right, so let's get outside and get a little more sunshine. Okay, so we're outside now. We're behind the barn where I sort of stashed this large piece of equipment. Some of you may know what this is. This is a moldboard plow. And I can't tell you how many articles and books and discussions have been made around the moldboard plow. Depending on where you come from, where you're headed in your farming enterprise and your sort of philosophy, in some people's mind, the moldboard plow is the curse to agriculture. In a lot of people's minds, it's still a blessing. And it's a wonderful tool and a wonderful idea, and it really demonstrates, the impact that us human beings can have on land in agriculture. This is an Oliver plow. As we were walking here, someone said this looks like an antique, and it is. Most of our equipment are antiques. And here's the thing about the moldboard plow that gets a lot of discussion. These big discs, these big blades here, are designed to flip sod. And as a grass-based farm, we create a lot of sod. Half my rotation's always in a deep-rooted, thick sod. And so it's the kind of sod that you have to actually manage if you're going to change what's there. If you're going to come in with a grain crop, if you're going to come in with corn, if you're going to or sort of establish a new pasture. And to be clear, my philosophy is that I hope that someday we actually learn how to completely farm without breaking soil and plowing at all. There's a variety of discussions we can have around that. But in addition to flipping sod, which is very disruptive to the soil ecology, but actually could be used as a means to get organic matter into deeper profiles of your farm, is that you can see the front edge of these are like a straight shovel, like that actually this part, the soil will come as deep as this, about 8 inches deep, and in our soils at 8 inches deep, we're into clay. So this shovel will actually, especially when there's a little moisture down there, which we've had a lot in the last few years, will actually compress that clay underneath and actually create what they call a hard pan. And living soils have a hard time sort of dealing with the hard pan. It's the kind of thing that if it was done every year, the hard pan itself actually acts like a swimming pool. It's not preventing air and water to move through this entire soil profile. It actually makes water sit up into the part of the soil that you're wanting to grow in. So it can be very detrimental over time, and you can actually destroy the life in the soil with constant use. So here's my philosophy. It's a very effective tool for moving thick sod, and the thickest sod I have trouble getting down to plant corn into is my orchard grass and alfalfa mix that I use for pasture, along with oats and other crops that I use to nurse that pasture on with. So that's only once, that's 1 year in an 8-year rotation, which in my mind is sufficient least use of a plow like this to get the job done in a fast way. It thoroughly flips the sod, and you actually have to let it sit, sort of mellow, let the sod start to break down, and then you go back in and it creates, it's a very bumpy field when it's done. So you have your second pass, your secondary tillage. This is a primary tillage tool. Secondary tillage typically is a disc, which I'll show you here in a minute. You have to go along the grain of the sod. Otherwise, you sort of start breaking yourself up in the tractor and the equipment you're moving across it. So I love and hate this tool. It's got an incredible history, but it's something that used judiciously can be very effective in any types of cropping system. All right, so let's check out some other plows. All right, so we're going to start walking what I call the equipment lane, equipment alley, and we actually graze this area in this early spring. It's sort of the first grass the animals get after they've been in on all winter, and I use the livestock to actually weed eat and trim down the alley so we don't have to come through with weed eaters ourselves. And what made me think of the livestock here, this is an elevator, which is set for today's haying operation. We'll actually pull the wagons in. They'll be full of anywhere from 100, 120 bales on the wagon. And we can offload them and load them onto the elevator. This one is electric driven. You can also get PTO driven. There's a lot of different styles of elevators. They're a bit gangly in use and moving. Once we set it for a particular cutting, whether it's first cutting or second cutting, we leave it sit here to get the work done. But the livestock, again, when we have them closed in here, and we just recently did, they love climbing up this, the goats and the sheep, the lambs in particular, and visiting the hay loft and seeing what hay is left from the winter. So it's fun to watch. There's been a lot of photo opportunities for people who have come through here and seen that. So we're going to come over to what we have, 2 machine sheds. This is what we call the small machine shed. Here's the problem with an 8-year crop rotation. You have very different needs for a variety of crops through that 8-year part of your rotation, and so a lot of different implements, and it's actually can be quite cumbersome at times. It'd be nice if there's 1 or 2 tools we could use to get multiple tasks done. That's really something that modern agriculture has done a really good job of, is they've got the system down now where a single pass in their corn soybean rotations basically prepare the soil on 1 pass. So that's a great thing. The downside to that process is that it actually requires the use of herbicides to keep the weeds down. A single pass on anything around here, the first thing that's going to come up even before the crop is going to be weeds. So you have to be very judicious on the timing, what crops you're using, the soil conditions, and sort of combine all those elements to come up with a system that allows the crop to come up successfully without having too much competition with weeds. So as we go through this, you'll start to get a sense of why we have all these different implements. In this first bay here, we actually store fence in here. Of course, farming requires a lot of fencing. We have, like I said, about 60 acres fenced for livestock grazing. Again, we're a grass-based farm. So we got a couple bush hogs. This is our smaller version here. That actually fits on the Kubota, the first tractor we saw. And very effective to get down more narrow areas and smaller areas. We can actually take that into part of the woods for trail maintenance. Very effective on hillsides. So it's a good tool to have around. This is another unusual tool. Not many people have seen these as a type of mower for cutting hay. This is called a Reese. It's a disc mower. It actually has 4 little blades in the bottom here. These are actually brand new blades I put on before this cutting we're working on today. And this rotates at a very fast speed. You can actually move really fast through tall hay with this, especially if the conditions are dry and right. I actually had trouble with new blades. The field I was mowing recently had no rocks, and I thought I was going to fly through it, but I couldn't. I actually mowed very slow this year because here we are in the middle of June. This field and rain on it through the year, sort of unusual winter. So the hay actually became what I call rank or stiff, and it didn't cut very effectively with a sharp blade. So you just got to take your time. It's a very effective tool. The nice thing about this mower is it actually has a hydraulic lift to bring this whole wing up for transport. Now if you're moving between fields that involve a bar ditch on one side, on the right side as you're moving, that wing, if you get over the curb, is enough to take the whole tractor over. It's a very heavy implement. So you need a good sized tractor. I couldn't put it on anything smaller than that 95, and it's iffy even with that. We have a tank sprayer, or it's actually just a fertilizer tank, which fertilizer for organic farmers is like fish emulsion, kelp. You can make your own compost tea, manure tea. What we use in that tank, it actually on front of a transplanter, a vegetable transplanter, which you can't see because we have other tools that are on top of it and some piping. So very effective tool for getting a lot of transplants down real quick. Another rototiller, this is like a foot, actually it's probably more like 2 feet wider than the first one we looked at on the Kubota. This will not fit on the Kubota. I have another tractor, it's a 2510. It's more like a 60, 65 horse tractor. And that tractor is actually a workhorse too. That 2510 actually is out raking right now, but we use it for mucking the barn. And so this gets a lot of work done fast. Again, the beauty of rotivation, cultivator, rototiller is you can get some work done fast. And finally, in this machine shed, we have quite a menagerie of animals here. We're a grass-based farm, but 2 animals I do have to feed grain. And we grow all that grain here, is hogs and chickens. And we go probably through a ton of feed every 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how many hogs I have here. So we like making our own feed. So this is a grinder mixer, another antique, and but it's been very reliable. It gets the job done. A lot of this equipment we have has either been donated or we purchased at farm auctions, you know, as other farmers have closed down their business. So yeah, let's go to another part of the equipment lane here and we'll carry on. All right, so we're starting to go through the rest of the equipment here in the equipment alley here. This is just a basic box scraper. We have a half mile of lane in here and another half mile of lanes around. It's actually a great landscape tool if you have ground that you've broke and it's bare soil and you need to level it up. You just sort of capture the gravel or the soil into it. It's got these little spikes in front to sort of scrape up enough to get into the box, and then you control its height and its angle to sort of spread it evenly throughout the field. Very effective tool. That's what keeps me in business with our lane. We have a gravel lane, and it's very effective in keeping that nice. Again, we're a half-mile back, and when we get the big winter storms, and it's actually quite beautiful on that lane when that happens, when I get up in the morning and everything's just deep in snow. I love it when it happens, actually. This is our snow plow. I put this on the back of our 2955. It can move a lot of snow quick. I can actually move that half-mile lane snow off of it in about a half hour to get people through. I could spend the rest of the day sort of grooming it up, though. All right, well, every farm is going to have multiple wagons. This is just a portable wagon we use. It's actually narrow enough we can pull through some trails with. This next implement here is very important to me, especially in today's climate change sort of conundrum we're in right now. Constant rain, very hard rains. It's compacting the soil severely. It's just, you know, Mother Nature's just been really rough on our soils these days. This is a Chisel Plow. It doesn't look like much of a plow. Again, another antique. We even have moss growing on it here. Chisel Plow. The beauty of a Chisel Plow is designed to do one thing, and that's to break that hard pan that either our plowing, like we've seen with the Moldboard Plow, or Mother Nature has created. We're getting a lot of hard pan development with the hard, heavy rains. Again, fields sitting with water. The clay underneath the loamy part of the soil starts to sort of structure up and create its own hard pan just from weather patterns. So this is designed, you actually sink these shanks about 12 inches deep, get below that 8-inch layer, and just break it open. Just break it open to allow those nutrients to move up and down in the soil profile and air and water. So it's been getting a lot more use these days, and it's an essential one in our rotation, more and more so. There was a time 15 years ago, before the weather really started to turn, that the rotation itself actually maintained the hard pan for us. We're losing that battle with the current weather pattern. So it's used annually. There's fields that I have different types of conditions in, and so it's a very sort of field by field decision point whether I'm going to take the time. You think, well, how, you know, this has got what, 5 points on it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. It takes about, I think it's 15 horsepower per shank to get these things down into the soil deep enough. So a lot of the smaller farmers with smaller tractors, you'll see them with chisel plows with nothing more than 1 or 2 shanks, just for the purpose of getting through that hard pan and opening things up. Here we are again, further down the lane. This is another antique. This is actually another Moldboard plow. And sometimes I have just very small areas. That's a very gangly plow over there. So if I have a small area that I'm trying to flip sod into, again, this is a very effective tool. It works very well. This is another piece that not many people would know it is. It's basically a bed former. It has this large pan and side panels in the back. It's for raised bed production, and it's typically used for vegetables. It's very effective in the production of garlic and other root crops. Our soils are very heavy, and so it's sometimes very helpful to get it up off of the elevation. It'll make a bed, I'd say about 8 inches deep. I think it's about 42 inches wide, if I remember right, maybe a little wider. These little spring teeth up front actually dig up the soil, that then the disc on both sides starts to accumulate. Before it hits this funnel here, you'll be a pile of dirt, and then it sort of like it extrudes the soil through the shaper, and then you got this nice uniform flat bed, which you can then take a transplanter on top of and plant into that bed on the top of, or just manually plant your garlic and things like that. So it's very effective. Again, very effective in sort of large-scale vegetable operations that are dealing with the climate change situation that we're dealing with now. So we'll probably be using more of that as time goes forward too. This is actually one of my most favorite implements. I'll be getting ready to use it here pretty soon. It's one of those things that only get used a few times a year. It's a great home for wasp, by the way. I got all this channel metal. The wasps love coming in here, and the paper wasps and the mud daubers, because they love this heat and the dry that this creates for them. They also live in the legs here. So anyways, this is a Lillis Tin Plow. It's not a heavily used or well-known plow. What I like about it is these sort of spider wheels on the back they're sort of like, they look like a little mini rototillers, but this is all ground driven, and they're actually tilted at certain different directions to move soil either right or left as you go over a row crop. The first thing I'll be using this for is on our corn. Right now I'm using a rotary hoe, which I'll show you here in a bit, for the early stages of corn production. But this guy will be coming in about a week or two, depending how fast the corn grows and how much rain we get. And it actually, when these little tines move through the soil, especially in heavy soils, it creates these little clods or balls of soil, especially this time of year where we've already had a lot of rain and it's sort of stiff. And so that's one advantage right away. It's opening up the surface to move air and water through again. We get a lot of crusting in our soils because of the clay, and this sort of opens that crust layer on the surface. But in addition to those balls opening up the surface, they actually serve as what I call a soil mulch. First of all, whatever weeds or weed seeds that are in those little balls, they're going to dry out because they don't have enough soil contact to keep going. And then anything that's weed seed that's underneath them, it actually helps to smother those weeds out. And then if you get the right soil conditions with the right moisture, you can actually send those little sort of mulch clods, soil mulch, into the row, between the plants in the row. And it actually will cover small weeds into that row, in addition to managing the weeds that are between the rows. It's a very slow, tedious tool. Most cultivation of row crops is pretty slow. It's what we call cultivator burn instead of herbicide burn. You're always going to take some corn out and some soybeans or any kind of crop out if you're not careful and the terrain changes, or there's a variety of conditions that can get you off track. So it's, like I said, it's one of my favorite tools. Both in corn and soybeans, I've been successful with the timing and the weather to actually make that field weed-free, totally weed-free, to the point people come in and look at it and they go, "So I thought you didn't use herbicides." Well, I don't. It's just I was lucky with the weather and the use of these tools. So love it. Lillis Tin, highly recommend it for anybody in the heavy soils. All right, continue on our tour here. We're grass-based, animal-based. We make our own compost. This is the tool we use. This is actually about a year old now, and it's a manure spreader. And I'm sure most people have seen a manure spreader at work in fields where when we're mucking out the barn with the front end loader, we bring in loads of manure, which is our manure is usually packed heavily with bedding. Also in here, we can build it up about this high. And then this is like a conveyor belt here. This bar right here rolls back and moves it through those rotating blades, which then breaks it up, sends it up in the air, it aerates it, makes a wind pile. I can build a wind pile about 7-8 feet tall. And so it's narrow, it's high, and it's aerated, which is the ideal starting conditions for compost. We've actually, it's not as big of manure spreader as we used to have. So when we're in the middle of winter and we got very wet barnyard, I minimize the amount of soil destruction I put into the barnyard with the equipment by just mucking right out into the barnyard into big piles. I build them as high as I can. And then after just a couple months, even in the winter, that pile will reduce its volume and height in half. It's really fun to wake up in the morning and actually see the steam rolling off of the manure piles. And then we put it in here, and then we actually get to blend and aerate and rebuild a windrow for compost production. Organically certified compost is a very challenging process. It actually requires you to flip it. Last time I looked, I think it's 5 times within so many days. Very short period. You're like flipping every 5 days, I think it is, sort of works out to. So and that's to keep up the aeration and the heat in the pile to make effective compost, produce stable humus, stabilize nutrients, and it's not certified organic unless you go through this process. And this is a very helpful tool to get that done. But on a large scale, you actually need what they call a compost pile turner, which is a very expensive piece and can move a lot of compost very quick. Alrighty, so we're back again. Just thought we'd show you a few more things that you might need to think about as you design your farms. This is a gravity wagon. We actually modified it. A lot of them have these wood panels up top to allow us to put larger loads in. We use it primarily for our grain crops. We've used it for other things, but I actually use these to actually store grain also. They're sort of fluted with a side hatch there where you can pull the grain off of it. And we do ear corn, so these hold about, 80 bushel, and very effective for moving grain around. We actually have that hay elevator actually doubles as a grain elevator. We have storage for our spelt crops and our oats and any other grain crop I grow in wooden bins and a small machine shed. So this is a tree transplanter. I am a big advocate of planting trees, and this sort of takes the work out of it. Again, it hooks up to the back of a tractor. It's wheel driven. A person sits in there with a flat of seedlings and drops the plugs into these cups. It can be set up to have cups, every so many feet between the plants. It actually is set up also for putting water into the hole with the tree, sometimes with nutrients, and very effective tool to get a lot of things planted real quick. This is what I call a field cultivator. It's a secondary tillage tool, again, primary being breaking ground, flipping sod. That's a primary tool. This is a secondary tool. It's more of a finishing tool. It actually has a little cage on the back that helps you level the field after these tines up front have worked through. You can see there's quite a few tines. We're only sending the soil about, 4 to 6 inches. So basically you have all the vegetation worked into the ground, the cover crop, whatever it is, and then you want a final pass to help level things. This is a good tool for that. It's also if you have a field for some reason, say you got rained on before you got the crop in and you have a field that's sitting open, and weed seeds tend to germinate really quick in those situations, and so you can actually, instead of replowing the whole thing, just bring this tool back in, sort of kill the weed seeds when it hits what we call the white stage of the seed. We talked about it last week. You don't even see the weeds germinating. They're still underground, and this disrupts that whole relationship. So one pass, a little bit of leveling with that roller cage, and you're ready to plant. All right, we're going to go to another area of the lane here. Okay, this is actually one of the first cultivating tools I use in the season with our corn crop. This is called a rotary hoe, and a lot of farmers call this run as fast and hard as you can and close your eyes tool. So What it is, it's got this series of spoons on each of these spindles that literally you go as fast as you can across the field. You keep your tractor tires and the wheel tracks you used to plant the crop. So you're not adding any more compaction to the field. And all these tines run through so fast that they actually kick any sod that's left in the soil. So when you're done, this is actually all filled up with clods of grass and soil. And you're basically hitting it again at that white stage, ideally. So when I plant a corn crop, if the conditions continue to hold, I'm actually in that field 4 days after that planting. That's the ideal, where nothing has a chance to start. And then you, depending on the conditions again, and so you got to be careful because you can overdo it too. It's like right now we're in what we call the dearth of the summer, where things dry out. And if you hit it too much and too hard, you can actually start drying out your field too much and robbing the crop itself of the moisture it needs to continue growing. So it's a balancing act like everything else in farming. And it's a very heavy tool. It's a very wide tool. It's a full 16 feet. Again, only the big tractor can use it. But in a good season on each field, I will use this tool at least 4 times ideally before I bring in the Lillis Tin. I've already got 2 passes in. I'll probably get a third, maybe a fourth, before I need the Lillis Tin after this. I can also use it for small grains. Actually, after a grain is established and it goes into a phase between the grains that you planted where it's getting weedy, you can actually go in there and the grain will remain in place for the most part and get the weeds that are just starting, again, during the white stage. Every farm, especially if you're going to have fence, you're going to want a post hole digger. It's a pretty handy tool. That can go on the 2510. It can go on the big tractor also. But this has an 8-inch disc on it, or auger, and we can send that post hole digger 4.5 feet total. Typically I'm going down about 4 feet, and very effective for setting a lot of posts in a quick way. Of course, weather conditions, again, you'll always like a little bit of moisture, and then we live in a very rocky piece of land here, and you hit a rock and it's got a shear pin on it, and sometimes you have to replace a lot of them. This is another primary tillage tool. This is an offset disc. I'm real happy with this tool because it's perfectly scaled for what needs done in terms of sod takedown or plow down. It takes a little bit of time, but these discs are serrated, and what helps it to, and it's heavy, it's a very heavy tool. It cuts into the sod, and it's offset meaning that this front gang here is pushing the sod and the soil this way, and then it hits the second set of discs, which are pointing the other way. So it takes that same sod you just cut, and it's like recutting it again and sort of shuffling it back the other way. So it's very effective. It does, in our heavy soils, again, take about minimum 2 up to 4 passes with this before you get enough of a seed base to work with and finish off. And it's I'm very happy with it, but if you got too much moisture in the soil, you shouldn't be in there anyway. But sometimes with this thing goes deep enough that it hits that moisture at about 4 or 5 inches, and it can really bog you down. So you got it. You don't want to be plowing when the soil is any bit slick or shiny after you plow it or dig it. A lot of times I'll just take a shovel out and sort of test the soil. But again, conditions are very highly variable. So don't be afraid when you're in a field and everything's going fine and you hit that wet spot, do not plow it. Go around it and wait for it to dry out, or just leave it fallow for the year. You'd be surprised. You have to live with the wet plowing for an entire season before it actually heals itself. This is a finishing tool. It's not what I would call a secondary tillage. It's a finishing. This is the spike tooth harrow that I had talked about earlier, and it's for leveling. And with this tool here, with the disc, you actually create on the edges in particular some clods and sod that you just can't get to again unless you want to break more soil than you want to. So what we do is we leave these wings up when we make a few passes around the outside where it's real cobby, and then we put these wings down. They're a bit heavy, but we put them down, level them up, and you have to actually keep this front edge up slightly so you're not accumulating any of the sod or clumps of grass or any piles of clods under it. And you sort of just go, again, multiple passes, sometimes 2, 3, sometimes you got to go sort of crosswise because a lot of cropping cultivation tools actually create furrows that you try to destroy and get it level again to make the seeding easier and a nice finished seed surface. And then it's fitting to end up today's talk about this tool here. This is a donation again. This is what you call a hay bind. It's for cutting hay. We've had to put some work in it to get it operational again, but it's ready to go. We're getting ready. Our next window after today that we're going to be harvesting spelt in what we call the dough stage. We'll be using spelt as hay this year. We gave up our combine this last winter, and so that's how we're going to get our spelt into the rotation. The beauty of this tool, of course, it's wide, so it can actually cover a lot of ground. This is a 9-foot hay bind. It can cover a lot of ground pretty quick, but the beauty of this tool, if I can come back here a little bit, is there's 2 rollers in the back that are sort of interlinked with these knobs on the rollers that actually, as the hay is cut, it's these rake forks up here kick the hay into the rollers, and the rollers crimp the hay. And that crimping will actually allow you to take a whole day off of your dry time. And that's very helpful in today's, again, climate change world we have to live with. It's last year we only made a third of what I need for a season, maybe up towards a half. I had to buy a lot of hay. The good news was that the grazing season started early this year. We had lots of warmer temperatures, lots of rain to get us going. So we had a very terrible year last year. This tool is going to help us sort of get us through this year in a much more effective way. So that's what I've got to show here in this little tour, and look forward to presenting this to you live and taking some questions from all of you when we all get together again. All right, have a wonderful day.
All right, everybody. So that was our presentation from Jeff about machinery and equipment. We got a nice tour of all of the equipment that we have at Stratford. I mentioned at the beginning that some of the equipment's really unique to a diversified operation in the fact that you have a lot of different needs for maintaining an organic and diversified operation. If you notice, some of the main focuses of a lot of the different tools that we utilized was focused on the soil, actually. And so as we are able to have, increasing impacts on the earth around us with the mechanization of agriculture, it's important to recognize kind of the impact that we have on soil and how we can continue to use machinery to make our work more efficient, but also to continue to foster health in our soil. And in some cases, this transition to mechanization has really damaged our ability to interact and foster health in our soil. So that's just something to keep in mind. If there were any kind of topics that came up that you want to ask questions about, feel free to do so in the live chat, or if you have questions, you can comment and we can get back to you. If you, haven't noticed yet, Jeff is not here with me. So if you were to throw a comment in the live chat that I don't know the answer to, I can relay that message to him. So we'll probably wrap up within the next couple of minutes. I wanted to give another reminder about what we have going on next week with Pollinator Week. So we'll have a live stream on Tuesday with a volunteer talking about native pollinators here in Ohio, talking about their importance and whatnot. And then on Thursday, we'll continue our Beginner Farmers Growing Collaborative series here on YouTube at 4 o'clock, talking about pollinator products and kind of how you can grow as a beekeeper and sell and market those products in different ways, and some of the different products that you can advertise other than just honey. So, continue to keep those things in mind and continue to be engaged in our live stream. I was really excited to see all of the people tune in today and learn a little bit about machinery and equipment. Continuing with like the beginner farmer lens, I think that machinery is probably one of the biggest barriers for expanding your operation. I know that when I was growing up on a small farm in Chillicothe, Ohio, one of our greatest challenges was the fact that we didn't have a tractor. And so we, only had a rototiller. And so some like tips getting started there would probably be to either find someone you can borrow equipment from if you're not able to invest in that piece of equipment at the time. There are several different like hardware stores. Sometimes you can rent equipment, like we were able to rent like a Bobcat, like an auger, things like that you can, just use for a little bit. That way you don't have to, buy that piece of equipment that you may use only a couple times, depending on the size and scale of your operation and kind of what you have in mind for your goals. And so, like we continue to talk about in every lecture, continue to think about your goals, continue to think about how you can foster healthy soil, and so on. So thank you guys for tuning in today. Hopefully you're able to tune in next week on Tuesday and Thursday. And make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel if you have not yet. So thank you.